Hello again. Here we are to continue talking about developing JavaScript libraries, and this is going to be day 3. I'm looking at the course syllabus, and you can see today's lesson will be unit testing. So let me click on the link here and go to the lesson page. Here's a link to the slides. Here's the lesson written out in written format, and we'll follow the slides here in the video. So let me present my slides. So today we're going to talk about why you should write unit tests, talk about unit testing. We'll talk about using Jest for unit testing. That's our test library. And then we have some sample code that you can write some unit tests with. And then we'll talk about looking at the code coverage. Okay, by the end of the day, I'm hoping that everybody will be able to understand the importance of writing unit tests, identify which code to test, and write unit tests for your JavaScript library. And then also identify which areas of code has been, or which areas of your code has been covered by unit tests. So in software testing, there's several levels. Okay, so the first level is unit testing, and then it moves into integration, system, and acceptance testing. Okay, we're just going to talk about unit testing today. So, here's a quote I found on the internet, all code is guilty until unit tested. So what is unit testing? This is kind of a long example here, but I'll summarize it. Essentially it's writing code that tests your code. Interesting, right? So, and you can test a lot of things. There's some things you can't test and some things you can test, right? But if you can pull out blocks of code, right, and then you can just look at that piece of code in isolation, you can ask yourself, is this working? And you can think of some ways to test it to see if it is working. Usually the situation is that you'll have a function, and that represents like a block of code. And we can test a function by asking if the expected output, for any given input is what we expect, right? So, why write unit tests? So unit testing proves your code works, right? So you might write a program, but you might not be sure if the whole program works. I don't know if you've ever found yourself doing this where you've created an application, but you haven't tested every single thing in the application, right? You haven't, clicked every button and, run every function or, checked every situation that can happen, right? So we can write unit tests that do that for us. Testing passes or test passing demonstrates concrete progress. So like as your code passes tests, you know that certain sections of the code are complete and functioning correctly. Unit tests also catch bugs earlier. So, it's nice if you see a bug right when you write it. So you're writing the code, you've written a bug, and you can run a unit test and you can see that, oh, the function that you just wrote isn't working exactly the way that you expected, or it isn't covering every particular, situation, right? That's better than writing a whole program full of lots of functions and then finding that one of those functions isn't working and it's hard to tell which one. So what exactly is a test? Right? So unit test, again, is about testing units of code, right? So in our code, most often a unit is a function, right? So that's a block of code that can be run. Functions always have input and they have output, right? So for any expected output, we should have, wait, let me re-say that. Okay, so functions are expected to have an output for any given input, right? So if we send a certain value into a function, we should expect a certain value to come out, okay? And if that is the case, if we're getting the values that we expect, then, our function we can say is working. What can you test? So we can test input and output, right? This is just unit testing, right? There's a lot of things you can test, but maybe they fall outside of the realm of unit testing. But for us today in class, let's just think of it as input and output. So we'll have a function, maybe it takes a number, and maybe the output is a string, right? Or maybe we have a function that takes no input but returns a string, right? So we can test those things. So, as a general rule, each test that we write should have a general, one single concern, right? So rather than writing tests that have a general concern, like one test to test your entire program is not a good idea. Better idea is we write one test that tests one piece of the program, right? And if we know that piece works, then we can test another piece, right? And if all the pieces are working, then we know the whole thing is working, right? Let's talk about FizzBuzz for a minute. So FizzBuzz is a test that people have been using. It's a game, and it's also a test that people use as an interview question. So people apply for jobs, and they ask them to solve the FizzBuzz game by writing the code for it. Okay. We're gonna test FizzBuzz, right? That's going to be our goal today. Okay. So what exactly is FizzBuzz? So FizzBuzz is a game where people take turns saying consecutive numbers. So imagine a group of people in a circle, and the first person says 1, and the second person says 2, and the third person says fizz. So besides saying that the numbers in consecutive order, if the number is divisible by 3, a player is supposed to say fizz. If the number is divisible by 5, a player is supposed to say buzz. And if the number is divisible by both 3 and 5, a player says FizzBuzz. And so it's kind of a fun game, and you can play different ways. Like you can choose different numbers and different things to say, right? But this is a common interview question. So it's been used as an interview screening device to test programmers. So if you can't write a program that counts the numbers in FizzBuzz terms, right, then maybe you need some more practice right before you apply for a job, right? So it's a game and an interview question. So you can read more about FizzBuzz here. I have a link to it. So for this example, I have some sample code here, and what you'll do is you'll go through the sample code and you'll write tests for the sample code. So you can download the code here. I'll have a link to it in the video, but I'll go get the code actually here. Let's see. So I'm going to open this up in a new tab, and here's my sample code. So the sample code has a few files in it, and then there's a README that kind of describes what is going on here, right? So you can read about this. And at the bottom here, there's some challenges, right? So these are the challenges for you to write tests, but you'll have to set up your test suite first. So to get started, what you can do is you can go to the code button here, and you can either clone the repo or you can download it as a zip. I'm going to just download a zip because that's easiest. And this should end up in my downloads folder. So here's my FizzBuzz code right there. And I'm going to grab the folder here, and I'm just going to drag it on top of Visual Studio Code and open it in Visual Studio. So when we look at the FizzBuzz code here, there is a few files. So first of all, there's FizzBuzz.js, and this has the FizzBuzz program in it, and it's made up of several functions. So we have a couple constants up here, and then we have a function is fizzy, a function is buzzy, a fizzy buzzy function, and a FizzBuzz function. Okay, and then we export these. So all the code here is written in Node format, right? So it uses the require statement to import, right, and module.exports. The index.js has a sample for a program that might use FizzBuzz. So here's how you would use FizzBuzz. First, you would import. Let me make that a little bit bigger, right? The first thing you would do is you would import or require FizzBuzz. So we've imported the code here, and then that'll give us an object that has all the methods on it, right? And then you can call the methods from here. So for example, if you wanted to get the results from a FizzBuzz game that ran 100 iterations of FizzBuzz, then you could say fb.fizzbuzz, and then you pass in the number of the count, right? And if we look at FizzBuzz.js, in here you can see that the program has, or the code here has, the FizzBuzz function that takes a count, and then I have some documentation here. So it says it takes a parameter count, which is a number, and then it returns an object, right? So FizzBuzz should return an object to us, and it should include a count, a fizz, a buzz, and a FizzBuzz. Let's give it a test, right? So to test our code, what we can do is I'm going to do this in VS Code. So I'll open up the terminal here and I'll type node index.js. So I'll run my program from index here, right? And so it'll run the code here. And then this is the result. So I did a count of 100. There was 27 fizzes, 14 buzzes, and 6 FizzBuzzes. And that may or may not be correct. I'm not sure, right? So, if we write some unit tests, we can figure out whether our code is working correctly or not. Okay, so that should get us started. There's the background, and in the next video, I'll run through how to set up the tests and how to run your tests. Okay, so thanks for watching.